What is Christian realism?
So I think most Christians agree with like the basic tenet of like there's a reality out there, and when we try to think about the world and we're trying to get things right. We really aren't just trying to project whatever is in our feelings or our heart. There are versions of Christian postmodernism that shift in that direction. However, um, there's basically a fundamental tenet that when we say things that are part of the Christian faith, like God exists, Christ rose from the dead, man is sinful, we are trying to say that the world really is that way. Whether we think it or not, whether somebody is Christian or not, this is true of the world. This isn't just our truth. A second piece of that is more epistemological, philosophers would say. Like, it's more a contrast between kind of realism and perspectivalism or something. Like, is the only way to know this reality to sort of already be a Christian? Or can it be seen sort of from the outside? And I think this kind of second piece of realism is almost as important as the first. To say, my neighbor down the street really does have access to the existence of God, as Romans 1 says. It's displayed in the things that have been made. It's not always easy to get at, and there are things that cloud our vision. But as Francis Schaeffer says, when we talk about God, we're talking about the God who is there, not the God who we sort of projected or only got from the Bible. That's a start.
Yeah. So this is making me think of Joe Rogan. I've been trying to tell people for a while that Joe Rogan is like Christian adjacent, sort of like Plato or, like Plato. So Plato predates Jesus, and yet he is described by the early fathers as a sort of proto-Christian, like follower of Christ before there was a Christ to follow. And so this is very strange to, I would say, like modern evangelical thought that you could follow Jesus before he died and rose again for your sins, et cetera, et cetera. And so, is that right? Is that a good encapsulation of what you're saying? That like Joe Rogan, whether or not he professes faith, believes, whatever the necessary components are there, he's sort of like touching on the values of truth, because that's a real and valuable thing, and love and different characteristics of God.
Yeah. I think that's definitely an implication of Christian realism. Because if you take it from the other direction, you're probably going to say things like, and there's an irony here. If you think that Christianity is the truth, there's one impulse to say everybody else doesn't have the truth. And I get that. It's sort of like, we've got the correct worldview. This is the one that's getting at reality. Therefore, other people are false. I'm not going to fudge it. Only, a liberal would fudge the differences between Christians and non-Christians. Some people might say. And I've had that impulse at different points in life. But I think that's not really being a realist. If you're a realist, you think at least part of the truth can be gotten at from the outside because it's really there. It's really there. So, the classic division was made by Aquinas between the preambles of faith and the articles of faith, or the doctrines of faith. And the preambles of faith were the existence of God. I'm kind of putting some of this together on my own, but like the sinfulness of man, as Chesterton said, like you can empirically prove that doctrine. You look out in the world, you're like, things are kind of sinful. People are misbehaving. And the moral law, like the idea of the natural law, is that it's written on our hearts. So at least some of that stuff, which by the way, is what acquaints us with our need for the gospel. At least that stuff can be known from the outside. Not to mention the value of self-sacrifice and like suppressing our vices and our passions in order to engage in self-discipline, like people like Rogan to some extent, Chris Williamson, Jordan Peterson definitely are talking about kind of stoicism. These things are visible from the outside. So you do get the question of like what to do with that. Like you can go pretty far with that. You can say these people are anonymous Christians. You can go not as far and just say, what I think is simpler to say is that they're accessing the preambles of faith. There's something called the preparation for the gospel. Like what those early church fathers said is, okay, we think the Old Testament prepared the Jews for the gospel. Like they were accessing salvation through Christ, even though they didn't know about Christ. Like David expressing forgiveness, the experience of forgiveness. Well, what the Old Testament did for the Hebrews, philosophy did for the Greeks, said Clement of Alexandria, a church father. So why? Well,
Yeah, wow.
The pre-Socratic philosophers were materialist atheists. Socrates and Plato believed in moral reality and even a God. So anyway, that gets you part of the way there.
Yeah. Yeah, that's so fascinating. I was just talking to my dad the other day about the way that Peterson lays out sort of the developmental character of God through the snapshots of each story in Scripture, the Old Testament. So like they piece together sort of this real God that they're interacting with throughout their history. And then through oral tradition, they sort of like remember and repeat and reiterate the character of God. You know, he created the earth and he, accepted Abel's sacrifices and he saved Noah through the flood and he got us out of Egypt. And so like you start to learn the nature of God through experience. And yet I feel like we don't know that it's experience. Okay. So this is where I want to take this. Anyway, let me just finish that. So that's the Old Testament to the Hebrews, like you just said, Clement of Alexandria said. And and so then philosophy for the Greeks is sort of like is like maybe as far as reason or thinking can and can take mankind on the same sort of level because they were so adamant that there was a world that you could experience. You know, they weren't postmodernists, right? They weren't even modernists. They're way back when thinking was cool, and they were really trying to get to, well, what is this? You know, like my feet are touching the ground, and I'm looking around and seeing all these things, and math is being discovered, and idealizing it, obviously, but just like there's great value in that. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And there's great value in that. And I think that when we dismiss it out of hand as like, like there's a verse about it's foolishness to the Greeks or whatever. I think that people picture Plato being like, whatever, stupid Jesus. Like the historicity of that is inaccurate, but that's just what people have in their heads, that like philosophers don't like Jesus because I don't know why, but my theory is actually, I think it's pretty interesting. My theory is that the people who are so dogmatic about the reality of their Christian system or worldview, they think that system of Christianity is less real than other people from the outside of the system. So it's like you're incentivized to cling to it, to dogmatize, to reject, to engage in some sort of like purification so that you're only thinking these 6 things over and over, no matter what the evidence tells you, in order to cling to something that you don't think is actually real, which is so crazy because it's like they get mocked as like, oh, you believe that Jesus rose from the dead, but I think they're the people that believe it maybe the least. I don't know why that is the case, but that is my intuition.
Yeah, I've got to bring up this quote from one of my recent posts about J. Gresham Machen.
Yeah.
So I've been arguing that he was this kind of realist, but from the Christian angle. And at one point, he was worried his mother was telling him, like, don't study, like, what the German liberal biblical scholars are saying, or don't study the outside perspectives. And he wrote, "Mother's mistake is the old mistake of the Orthodox, which shows how uncertain they often are of their position. To investigate only one side of the question, because to investigate the other side is dangerous, simply shows that you really believe the other side to be true. It is dangerous only if it is true." So
Yeah.
I think you're exactly right. If you're afraid of
Yeah.
what you would find if you did some philosophy, or what you would find if you looked into the evidence around the resurrection or whatever it is, that's actually a lack of confidence that it's really real. If it's real, then it's almost like you can look at it from a different angle and you're still going to see it there. It's almost like, I got to make sure to look through the Christian goggles, the VR goggles, because if I look over here, I'll be like, nope, it wasn't really there. It was just a projection of Apple technology.
Yeah. And it's so crazy because like I think the reasoning would be opposite of that. The reasoning would be that you don't want to think these other things because they're not real. And so you're in jeopardy of thinking not real things, and you got to be careful what you read and who you read and what teachers you're listening to, etc. I pulled a quote from a podcast that you did, and I'm just going to read it here. You said, "Thinking includes a risk, and there's sort of an attempt in certain circles, if more theologically conservative, to just like an insurance person prevent the risk, hedge against any risk, put up those walls and maybe put them in a little bit narrower than they need to be just to be safe." And so I'd like to ask you, what is the importance of risking thinking in life?
Yeah, it's nice to hear myself quoted because I agree with every word. It's kind of fun. Yes, that guy really got it.
That guy sounds
he
smart.
Really understood it.
Yeah.
But risk, yeah. What is the importance? I think the importance is, let me see. So it's been informative to me, like the experience where a Christian, usually young Christian, encounters something from outside their worldview and is just like really shaken. And that happens a lot. And often when they are led away from Christianity by that experience, I mean, they'll even just say it outright. Like the church I went to, I've heard this story several times. The first moment I asked a question that was kind of outside the script, they were like, let's just not go there.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think I had that experience. And that's a good thing. But apparently that is the experience in a lot of places. It's just like, we don't go there. We don't read outside perspectives. There are some churches, there are some alternative Christianity, like the Jehovah's Witnesses, do that. Somebody's knocking. Needs me for 1 second.
Yeah.
Excuse me for a minute. I'll be back with the
all right.
Jehovah's Witnesses. Yeah, so I was saying, like, I know that the Jehovah's Witnesses do this. I definitely hear about the Latter-day Saints, the Mormons, doing this sometimes with, like, just don't read the anti-LDS literature. But it's easy to say it's those guys. But evangelicals do this too. And so what you end up with is you're only being protected in what you've read and what ideas you've gotten. That only protects you until you encounter those other ideas. Because then you have no armor. I mean, it's the same thing Jonathan Haidt's been talking with, like anti-fragility, of kids are coddled and protected. That means once they go out in the world, they haven't built up any strength, and they can't. It's not always a battle, but you can't do battle with those ideas. You don't have anything to say against them. Whereas I mean, I do think there's a piece between the keeping safe and the taking the risk of maturity and growth. Like the kind of Christian worldview education stuff that really says like other things have bad worldviews, watch out, stick with this worldview. Like that's actually what I think is developmentally helpful maybe at one particular stage, and it needs to be advanced beyond gradually.
Yeah.
I'm because
Just a quick point there. Sorry.
Yeah.
I just I've been thinking a little bit, and we even on our podcast, I have a co-host, and so if I'm not interviewing somebody, we usually have a conversation, and we were talking about, and we have several times the verses about like you should be teachers now, but instead you still need milk, and like what is milk and what is meat, and like what is this advancement? Even in that passage, like the things he talks about are like, I mean, like I'm sure you know people getting PhDs in them. So it's like it's a really funny thing that Paul's like
PhDs in milk.
You guys should move right. You should probably move past these very elementary things. And we're like, I don't even know. Like the resurrection, is that we should think about that for a very long time. It's like, no, we're past that. Like we believe, we know him, and like what does it mean to really live our faith out in the world with Jesus, like as a friend is sort of, I really have been embracing Quaker language on these things because I just think like, I think friends and community are real things that we don't know about anymore because it's like our faith has regressed in some way to this milk level, but like abstract. We're abstracting it, so it's cool and thoughtful and sophisticated. But anyway, so developmentally, that's relevant at one point, and then you progress. Like you're safe to go beyond the bounds.
Yeah, to go with the metaphor, it's like my 2-year-old son is all about milk. And you could become like a milk connoisseur and sip it like you're sipping wine and like tasting it. Ooh, the whole milk versus different percentages, and like the raw milk. Oh, that's where it's at. And I think that's what there's a prejudice that the best Christian intellectual is kind of the biblical scholar, which would basically be, depending on what they're studying, frequently it's sort of like raw milk scientist. Like they get down to the textual criticism. They can study the chemistry of the raw milk, and you're like, wait a second, you're still not eating meat? Like, you should have passed the chicken nugget phase and the steak phase. Like you should be.
I think an important point here too, because I like philosophy and you love it, you study it deeply, and so it's like I don't want to pass this off as like steak is higher level, like a little bit more secular, a little bit more worldly, so therefore better. It's not that at all. It's just like I love that the term is realism, because that's such like I don't know, it's like kind of an offensive term, like come on, be realistic, like, and but really that's
or like
the core
gritty
of it. Like
gritty painting of real life people dying and limbs falling off.
It's not like something intellectual per se. It's not necessarily we are talking about the thinking aspect, but just the living aspect. Like some people are very against drinking, that's fine, but like go out, have a beer with your friends, and then tell me that it's a really bad thing to do. Like you need to be participating in life, I think, a little bit more than some people are. And that, I don't mean to push anybody's buttons with that subject, but it's like, if you are only criticizing people from a point of inexperience, I think that you might not be able to have much to say on that topic. I think you quoted somebody who said what I just said way better. Like you can tell there's no life in somebody's words if they haven't lived before they said them or something.
There was some Emerson quotes. No, that's definitely a thing. I think there's like practical implications of realism, as you're suggesting. But yeah, I mean, there's I forget the original question we were talking about, but we've been on this milk and meat stuff. We were talking about the risk of thinking. So, yeah, I think it's one of these things where, obviously, what you just said, you might be risking sinning. Like, given what you've been taught, doing X is sinful, but you're not sure. And I definitely think that there is some, the line between, this is a little bit Garden of Eden. Like, the difference between good and evil once you've tasted the fruit. We're post-fall. There's no way to go back to Eden. So I do think that's part of our experience is, like, you can learn that the line between sin and righteousness is not where you thought it was. And I think this is, a lot of evangelicals' experience. I was just listening to these podcasts about pipe smoking as one example, where you're definitely like,
you sinful reformer.
PCA, pipe, cigar, and alcohol, the Reformed, all this stuff.
Yes.
But
yes.
By experience, I think but that's even part of maturity. They call video games mature when they have sinful stuff in them. I don't think that's quite what it is, but just of knowing the world. Back to the intellectual side of risk, like, you've talked to an atheist. So here's a great example. Like, my wife was homeschooled, but in high school, she was taking college classes with, like, liberal professors and secular professors and different perspectives. And let's just say that's kind of like an inoculation against showing up to college and first hearing an alternative perspective and just getting, like, swept away. No, she had heard it. She had grappled with it, and you're not, she was still in her parents' home, but you're off at a college campus. You're not in a perfectly safe environment, perfectly bubble wrapped. Like, there's some risk there, and you start to build up the strength to explore other perspectives. And if you find that yours is correct, just stick with it.
I think that's the experience for so many people too. You were mentioning hearing about people that were unable to ask questions at their within their church community, and then I think that, like, unfortunately perfectly matches the tendency for people growing up in sort of a secluded, philosophical, theological space, going out into the world, into college, trying to, be successful in whatever it is they're studying. They're almost always going to be confronted by something that they weren't taught, they weren't allowed to talk about. And so then if it's your first time, you're just a rookie in, some Brazilian jiu-jitsu of whatever the topic is, and the other person is going to embarrass you, and you don't want to be embarrassed, and you're outside of your community, so you don't have your support system that reinforces all of those things that you were taught growing up. And so what is reinforced now by your peers and by your professors or whatever type of teacher, leader, person is going to be it's going to be the worldview that is confronting your own. And so it's very easy to just sort of like, okay, I guess I'll drop that. You're right, that doesn't make much sense now in this context, and I have no way of testing either side.
Yeah. I think what you said there's like a social dimension there of, like, being disconnected entirely. And, like, academic communities, people have made this critique of them. They do tend to ideological conformity. They end up being kind of their own church of broadly secular, left-leaning perspectives. And people do tend to just adopt that. And part of what I want to say is, I'm not advocating that. Like, I'm not advocating become more cultured and academic in your perspective and adopt the opinions of the New York Times. I'm not exactly saying that. I'm saying be open to learning from people with whom you disagree, and do those other disciplines. uh, be open to other sources of information. Like this was an interesting one. So I always had a prejudice against some of the social sciences. They just gave me the sense that they just push people in a certain progressive direction that I didn't want to go down. So I kind of ignored psychology, sociology, and all these different areas. In the last several years, though, I've been reading, for example, Aaron Renn, Christian cultural commentator, who he would often comment on things happening in kind of the theology church world, but he would bring in this sociological perspective. Now, Aaron's conservative, so it wasn't like the progressive sociologists who say everything's culturally contingent, everything's morally relative, but it was like bringing in a perspective of our behavior and our actions aren't purely determined by our theology, the ideas in our head. Many of them are determined by historical circumstances. They're determined by socioeconomic factors. And that does undermine some of our theology debates. It plays a role. The fact that this is sort of intra-Presbyterian thing, but like the more left side of the Presbyterian world is more urban. The more right side of the Presbyterian world is more rural. Okay, well, we think that's all theology, but what if it's partly sociology? Like, if you live in an inner city and you just take the most harsh conservative perspective, you're not going to win friends and influence people. And so there's a kind of winsomeness that's like just inevitable if you live in a city. And some on the right have been critiquing this winsomeness for becoming too soft or whatever. But equally, that perspective would not help you convert people out in a rural setting because they probably voted for Trump. And so they are disaffected from urban elites. So anyway, that's just an example of, I think you should be open to not just theology and Bible, but like sociology and history. And that doesn't mean adopting whatever the current sociologists and historians have a political prejudice of.
You spent some time in Chicago. Did you get to check out the Moody Bible Institute or anything like that? Just like tour it or look around the area?
I haven't been to Moody. I was in the area once, but I was a Wheaton guy, so that was more in my stomping grounds.
Oh yeah. I have friends and family that have gone to Wheaton as well. But anyway, I find it interesting to I don't know if you've ever read any Moody, but just like I read a biography about him, and it was fun because I had lived in Chicago, so I knew some of the areas that were being talked about, but it was like a couple hundred years before I was there. And so it's really interesting to just think about like this guy and all this stuff. It's so sad. A cool guy, lots of good stuff. But the one line I remember from this biography is Dwight Moody was a man of one book. And that was like a compliment. Like, praise God, he only knows the Bible, which is a library of 66 books. But the point is he only has one perspective, and it's the right one. And it's like so scary to me because I just think like sociologists may have an inaccurate theology, and they definitely have a limited human perspective that might be multiplied, by however many people participate in the study. But what they offer us is data. Like, it's so cool.
Yeah.
And I don't know. I just believe that science came out of Christianity. It still has Christian presuppositions, like not necessarily in the sense that you talk about presuppositionalism, but like the ideas that the world is intelligible. You can make sense of it, and there's an answer to your question. These are deeply real and Christian truths. And so anyway, I just think that to be scared of a study psychology, um, any of these things reveals what we were talking about earlier, that we
Mm.
don't believe in the veracity of what we're claiming, and so we lean on ignorance rather than evidence, and it's so sad. It's just sad.
Yeah.
I love to think. So like God forbid that I can't think about this God that I love, like I want to think about him. I want to learn about him by experience and through other people's experiences.
Yeah. So I've been okay. The one book versus like the classical
Yeah.
Christian tradition taught there were two books. There was the book of nature and the book of scripture. Obviously, the book of nature
Mm,
includes tons of books. And as you say, the book of scripture already includes 66. So it's very,
yeah.
very relevant. But I think that goes for so many other professions and disciplines. Like
mm,
a central thing in Socrates' dialogues was that everybody who was a specialist in one profession or discipline kind of thought they knew everything. Like
yeah.
nobody has a sense of the whole. And I've gotten just a couple comments on some of my work from people who are kind of outside the Christian perspective or in different fields where they're like, I see exactly the same thing happening in other ways. The difference between the theology nerd and the humanist that I've talked about,
Yeah. Yeah.
it happens in other disciplines. And it happens like in the ones you're talking about where the sociologists think that sociology is the key to everything. You don't really need anything else. Or I've been
Hmm.
seeing this, like the physicists think that physics holds the key to everything, and they end up doing some like bad philosophy along the way, or even making bad philosophy like a presupposition of their scientific method. And you're like, wait, hold on. I thought science was what we were talking about: data gathering, empirical theorizing based on the evidence. And it's like physicists and biologists, like they all love to do amateur, terrible philosophy. And like who has a perspective that's broader? I mean, to acknowledge both books as we're talking about scripture and nature is already to become interdisciplinary. And
Mm.
in academia, being interdisciplinary is, if you're at the very tippy top, like that would be impressive to people. Like, oh, you've done more than one discipline.
Yeah.
But anywhere down the hierarchy, that's just a negative because you're going to have published fewer papers in your own discipline. You're going to be less specialized. Like, and so it's really a broader cultural problem that's been with us since the time of Socrates, is people thinking their one perspective is all that they need and that it gives them expertise on
Yeah.
everything.
Yeah. Well, I mean, again, with my historical idealization, but like, I was thinking of him because you mentioned exploring pipe smoking, or maybe not personally. I don't want to cast aspersions, but like the topic came up, and I thought of Pa Ingalls from Little House on the Prairie, like ubiquitously a evangelical hero, Pa Ingalls, and yet he smokes a pipe. So if he was their friend or went to their church, I don't know how this would go over. But
Mm-hmm.
the idea of Pa Ingalls living on the frontier in Minnesota or South Dakota, he's like, he fixes his wagons, he does the carpentry, he builds his house, he farms his land, he milks his cows, he does all of the animal husbandry. He still interacts with like
Mm-hmm.
some people that are able to get the fine goods at the general store or whatever. But like generally speaking, all of these people are rugged and independent. They are self
Yeah.
sufficient, and so I think that like it's sort of the human calling to be uh to not be specialized. Like specialization
Yeah.
in some ways is a manifestation of the value structures or incentives of the world, because it's sort of like dominance and not that the kingdom of heaven is opposed to hierarchy, but just like you know what I mean, like
Yeah.
the Olympics. There's one winner, and everyone is trying to specialize in swimming or jumping or whatever it is. It's like, I think you're made for more than jumping, but your whole
Yes.
life revolves around, I eat this food because I need to jump higher. I sleep this way because I need to jump higher. So it's like you're missing, you don't have a full life. Like if it was one of those like blob graphs, you have one spike of relevance and then
Yeah.
everything else is close to the middle because you don't do anything else. I think a
Yeah.
full life would be, filling out the whatever shape the graph is.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's the side to realism we were talking about, the kind of grittier, populist side, which has been there in philosophy since like Aristotle, the philosopher who actually wants to sympathize with the common man and be like, we kind of need to get empirical knowledge of everything through experience. And it's there in these American philosophers I'm digging into, the transcendentalists like Emerson, who are like, the Europeans, they all specialize, but we Americans, we're going to be like farmer intellectuals who are like close to the ground. Someone like Pa Engels, the guy has know-how. He didn't learn how to milk a cow from the Bible. He didn't learn how to like build his own log house from the Bible. I mean, whenever the exalted versions of only the Christian really knows how to do anything, I'm like, to plunge a toilet? I mean, no. Like, that's a broad human specialization. And yeah, being a generalist versus being a specialist, it really is the world in the negative sense, in the sense of like the competitive meritocratic hierarchy of who's the best at the one specialized thing, as you're saying, is very different from living a full human life. And so I do think there should be a side of Christian realism that is a bit common sense. The other thing that came to mind was somebody I've admired along this front is the philosopher Wittgenstein, who I think people should check out. If you dig into Wittgenstein, like don't dig into just like the big books people talk about, because they are like very difficult to read.
Okay.
But like there's a book of his conversations, people roaming around town with him. And the guy comes across, first of all, a bit like Jesus. Like he has disciples, people get really excited about following him around. And he speaks in like pithy epithets that are really interesting, or that's not the right word, but pithy sayings that are just
Aphorisms.
Like powerful.
Yeah.
Aphorisms. And he did get a position in academic philosophy, but he like never wrote a dissertation. He just wrote the book he felt like writing, and they were like, well, this has revolutionized philosophy, so we kind of have to let you be a professor. And he quit philosophy after writing that book. And he went and became a school teacher. He kind of was terrible at it because he was an intellectual and he was kind of cruel to the students. And then he became an architect because he really wanted to deal with the material world, and like designed a house for his sister. And finally, he went back to academic philosophy because that was what he was actually good at. He wanted to be broader. You can see that impulse. But as an academic philosopher, like he had these followers, he had these friends, he repeatedly would direct them away from philosophy. Be like, why don't you become a doctor? Why don't you become this? Why don't you become that? Like live out philosophy in the variety of professions, which to me feels very like Protestant Reformation, where it was like, don't just be a monk. Luther is like, sure, I'm a pastor, but you should go brew beer, and you should go, get married and father 12 children, and you should go be a barber, etc. Just like all the different professions and worldly callings. And I think that can give you a perspective. My worry has been, if Christian theology and teaching is only formed by pastors, which is just the natural tendency, well, then it doesn't bring in the perspective of the layperson involved in the variety of professions and like integrating with real life. So,
yeah. No, I think that's a really good and important point. I saw you might have been the one that reposted it, but I saw on Substack C.S. Lewis quote that's like, we don't need more Christians saying that they're a Christian in different professions. We just need, or we don't need more Christian writing, I think is what he was saying, but we need more writing uh, on different topics with with the author's Christianity latent and
Blatant.
subliminal. And I think that that's so right, because like truth is true. That's kind of a core tenet of this conversation we've been having. Like it's real. And so then this reality is something that we need to be comfortable embracing, interacting with, digging into. Um, and if we are, then we don't need to use our buzzwords, our code phrases, our, it's basically virtue signaling, which is like one of these, the woke left, they virtue signal. But we do it. It's a pharisaical
We do.
tendency to say that,
Yep.
yes, I, you know, I pray enough. I tithe more than you. I went to seminary. I didn't go to seminary. You know, like wherever you are on the spectrum, there's all these different things that are a signal to say, I'm in. I'm good. We're good.
Yeah.
You know, we align. And I think that the reality is you need to have this like this very visceral and tangible uh, lived faith that doesn't look
Mhm.
absurdly different than your neighbors, because you need to distinguish yourself from them in some obvious way, but rather you integrate in your communities and you participate in your communities and you sympathize with your communities, even if like I think there's a lot of like sort of I don't want to be mean. I'm really not trying to be, but like top down uh service, you know, like where you come from the suburban area into the urban area and you find people less well off than you. And that's great. But like there are those people in your suburbs too, you know, like your neighbor is going through a divorce, or your postman is he's getting evicted, or whatever it is. It's like
Yeah.
just live in your real life and with Jesus, love people day to day in the actual interactions that you're having, rather than in the political stances that you take, in the clothes that you wear, in the music that you listen to, all of these sort of arbitrary signals.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh man. So that's exactly right. Okay, I've got a book by the Christian sociologist Christian Smith about evangelicalism as a subculture, like a sociological perspective. And one of the main findings in it is that first of all, he says, as a religious subculture, evangelicalism is very strong. Like his findings are, they are truly distinctive compared to other Americans. Other religious traditions are less distinctive. And so like Catholics are like 50-50 on whether they believe what their church actually teaches, for example. And like, I don't think we need to go in that direction exactly. And there's lots of
Yeah.
great Catholics, but evangelicalism has much more of a like everybody's on board, like we're teaching. But his other finding was that some of the things Christians, even American evangelical Christians, were most proud of, like their willingness to just like go tell people the gospel and evangelize in a kind of abrupt way, was a major turnoff to most other Americans. Like some of the things that were our strongest distinctives that build sort of subcultural strength that make us feel like part of the in-group with other evangelicals turn people off.
Mm-hmm.
Now, it's easy from a Christian perspective to say, well, yeah, that's the offense of the gospel. And it's like, well, is it?
Right.
Sometimes it's
Yeah.
Sometimes it's we're doing things to signal to other Christians that I'm spiritual enough. You're kind of suggesting that there's certain forms of top-down missions or helicopter-in missions that they signal to other Christians that we're really spiritual, whether they are the most helpful. If we were trying to be most helpful, I think we would do some of those and probably a lot of other things. Whereas there's a tendency to gravitate towards those. So for me now, this makes me think that a major thing for Christians to do is to become more human. And which means a bit more normal, as you're saying. Like And that's not my instinct. My instinct is kind of intellectual and ideological. You know,
Hmm.
I've been saying that like I stopped watching TV and movies like completely at age 17 after my kind of, you know, conversion, if you will. And that's been my thing, as it is for a lot of like academics. We're like, I don't do any video games or movies, any of that silly stuff. And, you know, about a month ago, my family bought a big screen TV. So, you know, we're shifting, we're changing. And
Hmm.
another moment in that was when this I was telling a jokingly, I'll say a normie Catholic friend about the book The Benedict Option, which was kind of this like go be weird Christians, like be strong. It's not all that. There's a lot of be a normal Christian part of your community in it. But he read it and he was like, yeah, a lot of great stuff. He's a homeschooling Catholic dad and all this stuff. So it's like, sure, it vibes with him to a certain extent. But he had some great normie wisdom. It was my one reflection on reading this is don't be weird. And
Yeah.
I listened to that and I'm like, yeah, there's a sense
Yeah.
of we need to fit in where we can fit in. That's being Greek to the Greeks, Jewish to the Jews, and so on. It's like we don't need to be weirder than we need to be.
Yeah. Yeah. Uh, I think some people. This is like how maybe people from different states make fun of certain states. So like uh, if you're from Ohio, you make fun of Pennsylvania or Kentucky or something. Like uh, Kentucky is their own kind of weird, and Ohio is their own kind of weird, and they might not be the same kind of weird. But if you're only thinking of the other state, then you're like, well, I'm not weird. They're weird. I think everybody that just heard you say that can say, I am weird in some ways, and that's okay, but I don't need to be weird. The weirdness is not the essential, core of my, uh, faith. Like you were saying, like,
Yeah,
I'm not being persecuted because of this weirdness, only because it's the gospel or whatever. Like,
yeah.
anyway, uh, I was thinking of I've been reading listening to the audiobook of When Prophecy Fails is an interesting study
Mm.
from like the 1950s on some pretty far out there cults. I can't remember the name of the one guy, but one guy was a Christian. He was like, he basically worked out the math and Jesus is going to come back at X date. And then
Hmm.
it was like, he didn't say a specific date. He just said a year. And he was like, well, it's actually the next year. I forgot they're using the wrong calendar. So we switched it up. And then it got to be a month and then a day. And he never assigned the day because of the verse about we won't know the day, but other people kind of like took over the movement and like just by popular vote said this is the day. Anyway, so all these people are bought in believing this, and they have the strongest proselytizing impulse. Like the people that get it wrong. This is what they're a group of sociologists did this study in the 50s, and they were like, we would figure that at some point, like it breaks down and you just
Yeah.
like lose your faith. And that does happen to these groups where like, okay, clearly he was wrong. And then they're just like disoriented and the group dissolves. But
Hmm.
in the midst of getting it wrong, the faith deepens, so to speak.
Mm.
It's really the proselytizing deepens. And I find that so interesting. The other example is like this lady that talks to aliens, but she thinks it's Jesus, but she knows it's aliens. And then there are alien UFO watch parties that they're doing and like super crazy stuff for I like normal people, I guess. And don't be weird, right? And so she's like the the day that they're supposed to come back and rescue Earth from nuclear fallout is just keeps getting pushed back and pushed back. And the way that these people like uh they just double down, triple down, quadruple down on what it is that they believe. it's like to reinforce the truth of it by kicking the can. And I
Yeah.
I don't think that every instance of a Christian community is a cult, but I do think that we're like vulnerable to cult like uh tendencies. And so
Yes.
I just want to be aware of these things, and not to say that like somebody that has the gift of evangelism is, struggling to believe their faith or whatever. I would just maybe not assign that gift to as many people as maybe claim to have it
Mm,
because they stand on a street corner and berate the people that walk by. It's like, I don't think that's really necessary. Like you made a great point in one of your recent uh, pieces of content about um, the importance of friendship or
mhm.
relationship supersedes conversion, because you
Mm,
you more than likely are not going to be able to get somebody on the first try to convert to a completely different worldview, because that's typically where people are coming from. Like, you have the wrong worldview, I'm going to change your worldview, and then you can believe my worldview. That's
yeah.
pretty heavy duty work.
Hard
But
change
the
to
importance
make.
of a friendship, a relationship, service, sacrifice, companionship, all of these things, like, they're real investments in a person's life to really communicate to them their value as a human being, a creation of God. Um, and I think that that's the only way. I don't want to say only way. That is like an important way that Christianity is spread, is by like
Yeah.
human contact. Obviously, I don't know
Yeah.
why it's hard to believe that. It's not intellectual bludgeoning.
Yeah. Yeah. I've definitely thought about this one. I grew up with some evangelism guilt, let's say, and overcoming that
Mm.
to a certain degree has been a major development in me. It hasn't been like I live up to my childhood standards of how many people I evangelize. I don't. I changed the standard, but not because I gave up on evangelism, but because I view the process as a lot more complex. So, uh, there's a writer on Substack, Ross Bird, who just did some stellar stuff on this. I interviewed him. We called it uh, "Don't Share the Gospel Just Yet" or something like that. And it was this kind of vibe of like the parable of the sower. Like, some people cast the seed, some people are doing watering, et cetera, et cetera. God gives the growth ultimately. Whereas I think most of us think we can chuck the seed, pour some water on, and then we give the growth almost. Or like we can, like
Yeah,
Elijah, bring
yeah.
the fire down from heaven today. And like,
Mhm.
I think we all know that works if you get the right drug addict on the right street corner at the right time, but not for many other people.
Mm.
Like, there has to be a
Mm.
great
Yeah,
coincidence for that to
they're
work.
pretty
Like,
open to experience. Yeah, yeah.
yeah, or they're like, I was primed to give up my entire worldview at the drop of a hat. Most people aren't there. Like, you can find
Mm.
if you want that, college campuses are your best bet because people are ready to like switch their
Mm.
religions for a brief 4 year period of time. One thing I observe. After that, every conversion I'm hearing about takes 10 years.
Yeah.
At least I've been hearing about intellectual conversions. Almost all of them take 10 years, and they are facilitated by conversation and friendship with Christians. And so that has to be kind of a less confrontational way of dealing with that non-Christian person, and more of a willingness, like a willingness to be friends with somebody who's not a Christian for 10 years without getting to mark off anything on your evangelism bingo card. But
Mm.
maybe that's because we're doing the bingo card wrong, because we're actually doing what Jesus and what Paul talked about, which is the watering and the sowing the seed. And actually, before any of that, before even sowing the seed, because all of us want to sow that seed, say that gospel, there's also tilling the soil, because
Mm.
there's different types of soil in the parable of the sower, but it's also possible to work soil, to till
Yeah.
it. Like, maybe somebody would be ready in 6 years after you've been friends with them, and then Life hands them a tragedy. That's kind of how people work to some extent. You can't predict it, but what that means is that our norm should be a lot more on the conversation and friendship side, which in itself requires long-term investment with people, which is hard to develop. Like that actually requires you, for example, to live in one place for a while, and to spend time doing probably secular things with other people. Like my wife has been getting back into tennis, and she talked about how at the tennis club people are just so friendly and they just want to hit together. And so, okay, well, there's. I also think you have to not view that purely instrumentally, because that just doesn't work. Like instrumental is just like,
of
I want to
course,
play
yeah.
tennis with you so I can evangelize you
Yeah.
at the first opportunity.
Yes.
And it's like, well, if the first opportunity is
Love. Let me tell you about the love of the Lord.
Nice, the Jesus juke. That's a good one. Yeah. No, if it's going to take 10 years of hitting with someone before they have a life tragedy and then they want to discuss it, between sets, like you can't be thinking the only thing that's good here is evangelism. So that's been another piece of my kind of back to the whole, how does Christian realism work out in practice? Well, okay, I got this from Dietrich Bonhoeffer. He made the distinction between the ultimate things and the penultimate things. And the ultimate things obviously are salvation, getting people saved, like the kingdom, the world to come, the new heavens and new earth. The penultimate things are the here and now, this earth, and all the things before somebody gets saved. Like they need food, they need friends, they need community, they need the goods and services that the economy provides. And we need to view those things as actually valuable, not merely instrumental to get people saved. Though that's a starting point. Like someone is much more willing to hear your thoughts on religion if they know that you care about them and care for their physical and spiritual, or let's drop spiritual, their psychological well-being. And so we need to care about the value of that, which is kind of a normal human thing to do. Like, I want to have friends.
Yeah.
But sometimes we Christians, as we're talking about, suppress the normal to say, I got to be weird as quickly as possible. Jump straight to religion. Well, I've even had the thought, like, why don't we ever ask people what they think is true, or like what they think is wrong with Christianity? Like, people who aren't evangelical Christians, if they talk about religion, it's probably more of a back and forth. Like, what do you think? Why do you think that? What do I think?
Yeah.
Why do I think that?
Yeah.
That actually might be something we can do. I mean, I think philosophy facilitates that. Substack facilitates that. So, yeah, there are just other ways of going about things than jumping straight to the ultimate things. Show people that we care about them on another level.
I think that what just occurred to me is like you were talking about sort of like conversational evangelism.
Yeah,
that was what I was classically trained in my missional discipleship program that I participated in, and I think the incentive, or like the way the game is laid out, the objective of the game is to get somebody saved, and that's wrong.
Yeah.
Like of course it's a good thing that somebody would get saved, but Jesus is the one saving them. And so like an introduction to a friend is very different than converting somebody's thoughts on a certain topic. And so like there's times and places for those types of conversations, but very often the most fruitful conversations didn't end in somebody's conversion. They ended in somebody like saying thank you for asking about that, or uh, I really appreciate the conversation that we just had. Most Christians I know wouldn't talk about that with me or whatever it is. It's
That's
like
it.
these sort of small, real victories. Because I think sometimes you could also pressure somebody on the street into like giving their life to Jesus. And then what? Like we were literally traveling around. So we were planting and watering and growing for one day. And then I hope somebody comes by and waters you. And like God is
Yeah.
faithful to send people to nurture those people, but like the importance of community and living in a community long enough to have these relationships. And anyway, I just was thinking
Yeah.
about that conversational element and the way that like there's maybe space here for like conversational Christianity, that we would engage in dialogue, because that's two people reasoning, right? Or
Yes.
dialogos. And so there needs to be
Mm.
these dyads and triads of people with different perspectives and experiences communicating. And so I think you do a good work. Yeah, you do good work on this in your uh, theology nerd to Christian humanist essay on Substack at the Natural Theologian, Joel Carini Substack, and
Hmm.
you use the symbol of like a closed system and an open system. And the closed system, I think, turns all of the nodes in a dialogue or with two or three or 10 people, all of the nodes say the same point. You might progress
Mm.
that point, like this person's been in the group for 1 year, this person's been in the group for 5 years, this person's been in for 25 years. So you have the low level, I believe this, and the 5 year person says yes, and I have come to believe this on top of that. But it's all in one system. The
You're
open
getting more and
system
more
allows for
indoctrinated.
somebody. Yes, yeah. So you're actually closing, yeah, the loop
Yeah.
by expanding your knowledge, and so then the open system, you do a good job of saying it's like what's open about it is the stuff that you can't control. And so like uh, you and I have one experience of life. I don't really mean to be like intersectional here, but just like as white people, as uh, you know, fairly well off socioeconomically, like we can
Sure.
assume certain things about each other. But then you have a third person from a different demographic, maybe from a foreign country, come in, and all of those things are suddenly blown out of the water. Like we don't, okay, now we need to hear what this person has to say about life, about the world, about love, about God. And so I think that the impulse there is human. It's not just closed system thinkers and open system thinkers. It's like our human impulse is to say, well, where can we find the common ground? And then that's all the ground that there is. So like, you know, God is good. Okay, great. That's it. We don't need to talk about communism or capitalism or, like
Hmm.
the best practices for mission work, or like there's all these different topics where there's five different legitimate angles to take on them. And that lack of control, I think, makes us nervous in the sense that, like, uh, well, how are we going to agree on anything if we're always like talking about everything? And how are we going to progress the kingdom in the world if we're not just like, on the same? It's like a football play.
Yeah.
You're not gonna
Yeah.
talk about what route you're gonna run or who's gonna get the ball. It's like, the ball's going to the quarterback because that's how it works. If we don't do that, then it's not gonna work. But I think football, it has a very clear objective, very clear parameters. It's a fixed sort of space in which the game takes place, and this is a closed system. If you play football in the
Mhm.
parking lot, then you're going to have variables. You're going to have fans from the other team. You're going to have cars. You're going to have uh, sidewalks, curbs. These things need to be navigated in a different way. The goal of the game
Yeah.
needs to change from get the ball into the end zone to don't trip and die. And
Yeah.
I'm way in the weeds here with my analogy, but I'm just trying to say, like, I would prefer that we would be comfortable in our Christianity, like walking with Jesus in vast open spaces, various terrains, and like let's go out and meet people with our Christianity rather than invite them to conform to sort of a limited and safe, comfortable Christianity.
Yes. Yeah, I think we want to almost have kind of the answer book, and we come and bring it to people, and it's already
Mm.
kind of all settled. Whereas I'm gonna bring in a few different pieces here, like that's what it felt like seminary was presented to me as. I went to seminary. Just think of seminary as like an intense version of what anybody gets at church, which is like, here are the answers. This is kind of what you need to go out in the world, and in a one-way direction, project this at other people. And that sets the tone for your conversations, but it also gives you a certain mindset where it's like everything is sort of within this circle. The perspective that's helped me get out of that is that idea of kind of wisdom and maturity. Where if I think that the knowledge that I want as a Christian is wisdom and maturity, then there's just no way that I already have it. I know I'm not even like 95% of the way there. Because with Bible stuff, you know, if you're just starting out digging into the Bible, you can feel like, oh, I know nothing. There's so much to learn. But man, if you just bang away at that for several years and only do that, you can get to the point where you're like, I kind of know the gist of most of what's going to be in the Bible. The latest biblical scholar will quibble with one Greek word or something, but you're like, I kind of get it. But that can then invoke, like, that can make you spiritually proud. It can make you think that you've got all the answers. If what you are after is wisdom and maturity, see, I have this experience now with the Bible where somebody will bring up a verse in a context of life, and I just never paid attention to that verse. And I'm like, whoa, I never saw that.
Yeah.
And so even the Bible now makes more sense connected to life. Like with Jordan Peterson. Here's just an example. Peterson, you know, is not coming from an Orthodox Christian perspective. So people wonder, does he believe? Does he not? Should we be pro him? Should we be anti him? And Paul Vanderklay brought up this verse where the disciples come to Jesus and they're like, there's this guy over here and he's healing people, and he's not one of us. He doesn't officially know the message, and he's not really on our team. And Jesus is like, if he's not against us, he's for us, and he's not going to fail to receive his reward. And it's like, whoa, I don't know many Christians who would say that, like, Jordan Peterson, even if he doesn't cross the line of saying the things we want him to say, he's not going to miss out on his reward. Like, whoa. Anyway, but, you know, forget about the Jordan Peterson thing. That verse, that passage of the Bible came alive in a new way. Now that I'd been in the world, I'd seen somebody kind of like that prophet show up who's not really on our team and be like, whoa, Jesus says that we should be open to people who aren't officially on our evangelical Christian team, you know, doing the Lord's work. Like, that's actually, as you said at the very beginning of the conversation, that's kind of outside of our evangelical mentality. So even with the Bible, I think it gets certain verses light up once you've been living life, and you're like, I didn't even see how that was relevant. So
Yeah. I can't remember. I think it was a quote from some Wesleyan thinker about our theology needs to be informed by experience, and you were writing about that line, and you just said, I didn't like that.
No experience.
That cracked me up. It's like, at the time you were like, no, that's crazy. We don't need to do that.
Just
but
the Bible.
It's just so fundamental. Like it's right. Yeah, let's ignore everything that is going on in our real lives. That doesn't sound healthy, you know, like it sounds unhealthy.
Yeah.
I wanted to read this passage because I just have been thinking about it this whole time, like in preparation for this conversation, but then as we've been going through. So this is Acts 17:22-28. Paul then stood up in the meeting of the Areopagus and said, People of Athens, I see that in every way you are very religious. For as I walked around and looked carefully at your objects of worship, I even found an altar with this inscription: To an unknown God. So you are ignorant of the very thing that you worship. And this is what I'm going to proclaim to you. The God who made the world and everything in it is the Lord of heaven and earth and does not live in temples built by human hands, and he is not served by human hands as if he needed anything. Rather, he himself gives everyone life and breath and everything else. From one man he made all the nations, and that they should all inhabit the whole earth. And he marked out their appointed times in history and the boundaries of their lands. God did this so that they would seek him and perhaps reach out to him and find him, though he is not far from any one of us. Then he quotes, For in him we live and move and have our being. As some of your own poets have said, we are his offspring. And I read that whole thing because a lot of people know the story about the unknown God, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I find that to be incredibly relevant to this conversation about Christian realism. Like these people are, Paul observed the preambles of faith, as you put it, in these people, the way that they lived. They knew that someone must have created this. They knew that someone must have been involved in ordering the lands and all of these things. And Paul's like, yes, yes, yes. And then he says, like, you already know this. In him we live and move and have our being. It's like that is just real. And so I routinely forget that this is a quote of a Cretan poet because it's such a like real sentiment that I assume it's in one of the epistles and Paul wrote it down because it's so well put. But Paul is pulling from the culture and the natural thinkers around him that are observing what's going on, and
Mm-hmm.
and I don't know, that could have even been like a pantheistic sort of view of the world that he's quoting, but he's like appropriating it. He's saying this
Yeah.
is where this is meant to be. Like in God, we live and move and have our being, rather than God is the world or whatever. He's saying like God is who He is, and that is who we have our life in. So anyway, I think that this Christian realism isn't just something that we're like imagining, or for somebody that might be like, well, these guys haven't given me a proof text. This isn't my proof
Yeah.
text, but just to say, like, I think this is something that Paul would be comfortable with, like interacting with the world around him and saying, hey guys, you got this part right. And I know this part, let's put them together
Mm-hmm.
and live with God in reality.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, from what I've heard, it's referencing Zeus. So, I mean, he
Mm.
was willing to say that, that top God, there is such a being. Everyone below him is an angel and not God. So we've got to revise your polytheism. But, in Zeus we move and have our being. I mean, it's controversial, but like over in the Islam, like Allah is just the word for God. And, you know,
Mm.
I think it's pretty straightforward to say for any monotheist that they're talking about the one God that is there. Other people don't think so, for at least Islam, some other ones. But I mean, the Old Testament didn't deny the existence of the other gods, so you've got that too on the flip side. But
Yeah.
you do see an approach there that is very constructive, I would say, rather than destructive of other worldviews and
Yeah.
religions. It is saying, here's the truth, what I call the common ground between believers and unbelievers, or between our religions. Truth you got, let's build on that. As opposed to this opposite apologetic method, which is destroy your perspective so you can adopt mine because you have nothing else.
Mm-hmm.
I think that
Mm-hmm.
shapes how we have conversations with other people. Are we seeking common ground
It's
from which to build?
Yeah. It's like theological colonialism, all right, all of this stuff you have here is terrible. I'm going to make it better and then take all of the good stuff that you have. Like it's it's just not cooperative, like you're
Yeah.
trying to eliminate the other person sort of in a competitive way. Like, well, you can't think that anymore because I beat you in this game of thinking, and that
Yeah.
doesn't tend to work, I don't think.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Um, I wanted to ask you if you've ever read any Dallas Willard. Are you familiar with his thinking?
I'm somewhat familiar. I haven't read nearly enough.
Yeah, I think you'd love him. Um, I just want to quote some of the introduction to the Divine Conspiracy, but I really appreciate so much of his work. He really focuses on discipleship, and so it's a really it's sort of the practical element of Christian realism that we were talking about, like
Hmm.
um, because I think if you pay any attention in churches that you're a part of, uh, you will find so many people that are concerned with how to be a better Christian. And this manifests in lots of Christian absolutism, which you have an article sort of opposing that to the realism. And it's
Mm-hmm.
like they long to be more conformed to the cultural image of a Christian that their community has, rather than to the image of Christ. And mm, there might be some crossover there between the way that they view Christ and the way that they build, the ideal member of their community. But Willard is so focused on. Actually, I wanted to say this earlier. You mentioned the ultimate and the penultimate from Bonhoeffer. I think that Willard beautifully, masterfully lays those out in sequence. So the that's even what those terms mean. Penultimate is right before you get to the ultimate. And so like
Yeah.
you don't need to, it's not a ranking of them. Rather it's a sequencing of them. And so these penultimate things lead us into the ultimate. And so
Hmm.
um yeah, that's the significance to me of like Willard and his contribution to Christian thinking is like the kingdom is uh is here and now and forever. And so it's like we have this opportunity to live in the world according to the rule and authority of Jesus, and he's teaching us to do so in a way that is invitational to other people, and that we get to experience all of these great good things that the epistles talk about, like peace and love and joy and patience and kindness, and like these things that maybe elude us if we're more concerned about being right about this one topic or wrong about that other topic, concerning ourselves with being right and wrong, I think makes us fall into the trap of ignoring the blessings of a faith in Jesus. So this is from the introduction to the Divine Conspiracy. He says, "My hope is to gain a fresh hearing for Jesus, especially among those who believe they already understand him. In his case, quite frankly, presumed familiarity has led to unfamiliarity. Unfamiliarity has led to contempt, and contempt has led to profound ignorance. Very few people today find Jesus interesting as a person or of vital relevance to the course of their actual lives. He is not generally regarded as a real life personality who deals with real life issues, but is thought to be concerned with some feathery realm other than the one we must deal with and must deal with now. And frankly, he is not taken to be a person of much ability. He is automatically seen as a more or less magical figure, a pawn or possibly a knight or a bishop in some religious game, who fits only within the categories of dogma and law. Dogma is what you have to believe, whether you believe it or not. And law is what you must do, whether it is good for you or not. What we have to believe or do now, by contrast, is real life, bursting with interesting, frightening, and relevant things and people. It is a failure to understand Jesus and his words as reality and vital information about life that explains why today we do not routinely teach those who profess allegiance to him how to do what he said was best. We lead them to profess allegiance to him, or we expect them to and leave them there, devoting our remaining efforts to attracting them to this or that. Skipped ahead there at the end, but I, I think that uh, it just popped out to me in preparation for this conversation that Willard is the reason that I have been thinking about Christianity as something real. He was one of the first like big books that I read after becoming a Christian, and um,
Mm.
I just I want you to respond to any of what I just said. I know it's kind of a lot, but just like,
Yeah,
uh, does that resonate?
definitely. That definitely resonates. Um, yeah, you know, one of the reasons I think I missed out on the Willard and like Richard Foster kind of crew, both on spiritual disciplines. The Willard's more the philosopher, so even more at my alley. Like I should have. Is I think because
Definitely.
I was in theology mindset. So I was
Mm,
reading what the theology reformed blogs said about these two, and it said they were two, justification by your works. And I think that that's like a manifestation of the opposite mindset of exactly what he's saying. Um,
mm,
and as a result, like parallel to what he was saying there, since seminary, for example, I've had to think about the person and life and preaching of Jesus a lot more. When you have a doctrinal focus, you think about his death. You think about his death
mm.
and you think about how it saves us from sin. Now, even Pauline theology and Reformed theology have a major account of sanctification, like the lived life of Christianity, good works, though I think it can tend to be downplayed because of a doctrinal focus. But what it leaves out is the preaching of the life of Jesus, which again does not conform to that kind of doctrinal standard. Like, back to my friend Ross Bird in that interview, like, Jesus usually didn't state doctrine, he often hid the doctrine.
Yeah.
So, like,
Mm.
obviously, he hasn't died yet. He could have at least told them about the incarnation, just like come out with it, said, I'm God. I am God, the God man. Like, you guys don't need to have all these, councils and debates later on. Let me just make it clear. But whenever anyone got wind of the truth, he was like, shh, don't tell people.
Yeah.
Now, they didn't always obey him, and then, okay, people think that parables are these ways of making things accessible, using farm analogies and real life economic analogies.
Mhm.
The disciples ask Jesus why he's doing parables, and Jesus says, so that people will not understand what I'm talking about, which is the opposite of our evangelistic technique and our doctrinal
Yeah.
emphases. Jesus preached in stories that hid the truth, but that that brought people along. I was going to say no one could object to. Jesus brought along all the normal people. The only people he offended were cultural elites and religious leaders. I mean,
Yeah.
that's very striking. And so I think exactly to what you and Dallas Willard are saying, like, to be like Jesus is not exactly what we would think from our kind of Bible and theology perspective. Um, like you can end up a lot closer to a Pharisee just by following that train of thought. Like, man, if I know all the Bible verses the
Yeah.
best, you are most parallel in the gospel stories to a Pharisee. Now, that doesn't
Mm.
disqualify you because Jesus studied with the rabbis. People called him a rabbi. He knew the scriptures. But I think the question is, if you're going in the theology direction, as I already have, so I have no choice. I'm not going to become the normal person who's just trying to figure out the Bible the rest of their life. I already screwed up that possibility. So my only hope is to try to switch from Pharisee mode over to more like Jesus mode, which means you have
Mm.
to put doctrine in perspective. Okay, my mind is going back to this discussion I saw between John Piper and Rick Warren. John Piper tends to
Mm.
be, who we theology reformed nerds follow. Like, he's our guy. Rick Warren is who we were like, oh, those big megachurch
Yeah. Yeah.
evangelicals. And Rick Warren said something absolutely brilliant and wise, which was, I'm happy to learn some theology, but I want to be living up to like that theology. Like if you give me a certain dose of theology, I want to live that out then. Or I could imagine reversing it, like this is the life I'm living. What's the teaching that I need for that? Whereas the theology mindset tends to be, give me all the theology, but my life is still way back here. So for someone like me, and this is my theology nerd to Christian humanist angle, is the process is going to be learning about life and learning to live it out. And that might mean learning to downplay the theology. Like, I need to learn to talk to my neighbors about football. I need to learn to talk to my neighbors about, if we can get there, philosophy, where you're not quite dating the gospel, or psychology, or whatever it is, just like, or normal life. Again, to become more human, because it's only within like the actual warp and woof of human life that you can see how theology applies. And frankly, a lot of it doesn't. It's at most distantly, some of it really not at all. Like and so theologically, I've been drawn to the doctrines that really do matter. So in the Westminster Shorter Catechism, question 17 is, what is the estate into which man fell? Man fell into an estate of sin and misery. This has become like a centerpiece of my theological reflection. Mostly, though, for the misery, because I think Christians tend to ignore the misery and the curse of the condition, the effects of the fall. When people have problems, we tend to think, well, I'm a Christian, so I think it's sin. They have problems because of sin. Yeah. Well, yeah, but they might have problems because of Adam's sin, not our fault. And then the cascading effects of the fall, so that our psychology is messed up and our we're in deprivation and we've got issues and we don't know how to deal with them and we're ignorant. The 4 wounds to human nature that Aquinas talked about, of ignorance and malice and concupiscence and all these things that are warring against our serving Christ. And so I'm drawn to a doctrine that was never really dwelt upon in my theological education as the really practical one. And it's also the one that like poets and novelists have gotten the best. They've called it the tragic sense of life. It's the fact that for all the attempts of utopians and idealists, whether they're secular or they're theological, like human nature is deeply flawed, and probably the best we're going to do this side of eternity is find some consolation for our sufferings. We're not going to solve the problems of existence. Well, that puts things in a different perspective. If everyone got the right theology, nothing would really happen. We'd still be the same messed up human creatures that we are. We need gradually to grow in wisdom and, to find our need of salvation from sin, yes, but also from the misery and suffering. The hope of the new heavens and new earth is every tear being wiped away. Okay, well, what human being doesn't want that? Everybody's on board with that.
Yeah, that's such a good point. And the subheading of your Substack is teaching Christians to learn from secular sources or something like that. And I think that we have very aligned goals. I think I might even be the inverse of that. Like I want to bring the good and true and relevant things, sort of like Jordan Peterson does. I'm not qualified or in any way to compete with him, but just like in that same field, I would like to bring the Christian wisdom that I found to be so life altering and beneficial, healing in my life. I want people to know that is something that's relevant to them and not just a closed theological system that they have to ascribe to in order to, sort of delude themselves into any benefit, and that is uh, just a tragic perspective that I think the devil and the world and whatever people are deceived into believing that, oh, I have to be tricked into believing that the Bible is real in order to do that, in order to reap
Yeah.
any of the benefits of it. But yeah, I think
Well,
as we talked about today, it's there's real stuff. There's real stuff that people even know about already, but maybe don't associate with Christianity.
yeah, that's awesome. Well, I was just going to say, like, that's my hope for what people can do. I wish I got to just do that a bit more, but my my mission just ends up being helping the Christians to get kind of out of the closed system mindset so they can go talk to non-Christians in a more natural and human way, which I think will be actually more productive for the cause of Christ, if you will.
Yeah.
But we actually need to work on ourselves in order to be ready to do that.
Yeah. 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 So everybody go check out Dallas Willard and Wittgenstein and all the other people that we recommended today. And I want to give you the chance to tell people where to go to see more of your stuff, because I think it's so great. You do just a great job of what that subtitle says, helping people learn from other sources.
Thanks. Yeah, well, it's joelcarini.substack.com. You can search The Natural Theologian on Substack, on YouTube, and even on Amazon. I do have a book. This is my leather-bound version I got, but you can grab
Nice.
it. It kind of collates my perspective in a book, or there's an ebook on Amazon too. But any of those places, and I'm writing essays. I'm making some YouTube videos to kind of spell out this perspective.
Sweet. Awesome. Go check it out, people. And thanks for listening. I had a great time, Joel. I will look forward to hopefully doing this again in the future.
Thanks, Ian. I enjoyed it, and I look forward to future interaction as well.